Do this, huh? Really curious how this is going to work. I really want this to be useful to you, of course, but really excited just to try this out and see if this is productive, if this is useful, um, and if this gives you the kind of help that will get you rolling and hopefully get you into a place that you're happy with your work and with your code. So, good evening, everyone. How's it going? We got the chat already going. Oh, sweet. So I on a second screen, I've got the stream rolling so I can see what's going on. Yeah, that's always weird. Good. How's the audio? Can everyone hear me okay? That'll probably take a moment to actually get some feedback on. Good enough. Right on, right on. Yeah, I don't know. I think I've actually got kind of low ping tonight. I'm hoping that the lag isn't too bad. If the lag ends up being a problem, please let me know, and we'll go from there. All right, so the goal of tonight is to give you an opportunity to ask about the topics you'd like to review. Oh, the audio is trash? Can't hear anything? Oh, that's a problem, isn't it? Yeah, my ping is kind of weak right now. Super dropped frames. The GC control. Yeah, well, retro station over there, right? Um, so, is the audio bad? Perhaps I ought to start the stream again. Just want to make sure. Yeah, it's freezing up for me. Okay, cool. All right, hang on. Let's stop the stream. Let's start again. Oh, good. You can hear fine, so that's good. Yeah, the stream keeps lagging on mine too. Um, so are we okay? Hi. Are we okay with audio then? Yeah, see, it freezes on mine too. That's weird. Let's do that. That's weird too. Sorry, I'm trying to set this up so I don't know, so I'm not using so much of my own home bandwidth, but we'll see how that goes. There we go. All right, so if all right, so if the audio's okay, if you guys can hear me fine, if most of you can hear me fine, then let's try to roll with this and we'll just make the best of it. It's possible that with my wife upstairs playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I might need to like reset my router and I don't know, find some way to share the bandwidth a little bit better. You think we're good? Good. Might need to reuse the bitrate for stream. Yeah, you know, it's kind of interesting because I've done this before. So I'm using OBS for my streaming software, and I've used. Let me just check the settings really quick. I mean, my video bitrate is at 6,000, and I thought that'd be plenty. That shouldn't be an issue. If you have a suggestion for the setting, let me know, and we'll try it and see if it works. Yeah, audio is a bit laggy, or video is a bit laggy. Okay, sorry for the technical difficulties, but let's see what we can do with what we've got. Checking the stream right now to make sure that the audio syncs up with the video. All right, so let's do what we can do. So you guys are in the middle of your second week of intro, and my question to you is, with which topics do you feel like you're struggling right now? And try to focus on like topics and principles as opposed to very specific granular issues with a particular program like Fraculator maybe. We can ask questions around that later, but I'd like to focus on the topics and the principles more than the specific issues. So take a moment and kind of consider what topics you're struggling with. Also, while you're doing that, and I'm waiting for stuff to come in, uh, um, so behind me, this is sort of like my audio media room. I'm a bit of an audio home theater nut, and all the way in the back, there is my. This is actually a much longer room than it looks, and so in the very far back is my 65-inch 4K TV. That's where I do all my primary gaming and movie watching. And then right immediately behind me, just right, let's see, how do I do this? Right, how do the weather people do this? But like right here, right, that is my retro station, complete with GameCube, N64, Super Nintendo, and a working Atari. Oh, and a Sega Genesis with 32X and Sega CD, because that's like almost every system I ever owned as a kid. I still have the originals for the most part. Oh, yeah, everything's laggy. All right, so let's just see what we can do. Maybe there's a way we can make this better in the future. All right, so I'm looking at the chat right now to make sure that let's see. Yes, everyone has buffering to hell. Oh, yeah, we all have a lot of buffering. Yay. Sweet. So, let's think about where you're struggling. So, while you're thinking about that, I'm just going to go ahead and pop open my Eclipse here. Or, yeah, no, this is Eclipse. Yay. In fact, to make sure that we don't have like any cross-pollination or any distractions here, I'm going to go ahead and start a new Maven project that will be just for streams like this. So I'm going to go about this is just a Maven project. If you are joining this stream but you are not in one of my 3 sections, welcome, welcome, glad to have you. But I make my projects like this. I'm pretty sure that Professor Cox does it just the same. And here we're going to do Twitch demo. And we'll hit finish. So I've got some suggestions here that we focus on loops like 4 and 4 each, which is very interesting to me because at this point in the game, we haven't needed loops, at least not 4s and 4 eaches. For Fraculator, you do need things like while and do while. In fact, do while is probably going to be your hero. But 4s and 4 eaches, you don't really need those unless you're using an array to store the components of your fractions. At that point, doing a 4 each, all right. I can kind of see that. I'm still not sure why you'd be using a 4 each particularly, but we could always look at that a little deeper and see why you need that thing, right? The why of something is so valuable, and we have to make sure that our why is clear. Remember that for every tool that exists, it has a job for which it is best suited. We can use other tools to do that job, but that doesn't necessarily make it the right tool for that job or that it'll get the job done the best way. But if you would like to learn about loops, we can learn about loops. I'm actually going to talk about loops in class on, let's see, tomorrow's Thursday, so Friday, because tomorrow I want to focus more on ifs and elses and the different kinds of if-elses we can do. But it looks like the biggest request here is loops. And yes, humble brag. I don't know if that's about me and my gaming systems, but I will take it because, yeah. And not so humble. It's just a brag. All right, so let's go back over here to our project. And let's go ahead and add our first package because that's what we got to do. Remember, the default package is a trap. The default package is a trap. So we're going to just call this, app because I'm not really we're going to be like in a demo space. And I'm going to go ahead and add a new class. And let's just call it demo. Let's not call it program. We always call it program. Let's just call it demo. And that'll be fun. And we'll add a main method so we can dink around with that. And here we are with our... Now, while we're here, let me go ahead and ask the question, is this readable? It looks okay on my screen, but I want to make sure it looks good for you. If this is not readable, let me know and I'll zoom in some more, okay? All right. So let's talk about loops. Now, what's the purpose of a loop, right? By its name alone, you could probably figure it out, but the idea is that we want to make a block of code between two curly braces. And yes, this right here, this is the universal hand signal for open and closing curly braces. Don't argue with me, it just is. And so we have these curly braces that are going to encapsulate some block of code statements, right? And the idea is that we want to put in that block some sequence of steps, some snippet of code that we expect to run repeatedly. If we're going to demonstrate for loops, for example, and yeah, that's a good place to start for us. Let's start with for. And the idea of a for loop is that given that I know in advance or can mathematically determine how many times I want the loop to run, I should use a for loop. So let's do something really contrived and really simple. What if we wanted to do a countdown, like to an explosion, where let's do countdown. You know what? I'm sorry. Let's back up one step. Let's show this in an even simpler thing, in an even simpler context. Let's do. Let's just count up. Let's count up. Count up from 1 to 10, inclusive. Whenever I talk about ranges in code, you're going to see me talk about inclusive quite a bit. And the reason is that in computer science, there are often cases where you give some range of things, and either the lower end or the upper end is considered part of the boundary of the range, but not included in the range. So for example, in computer speak, if I were to say choose a number between 1 and 10, then to a human, we would say, oh, 1 is a valid choice and 10 is a valid choice, right? But to a computer, if you say 1 to 10, 1 is often valid, but 10 is often just outside the limit. In other words, I can have numbers 1 through 9, and that's legal and that's okay, but the number 10 is considered outside, and we often refer to that as an exclusive boundary. So we have an inclusive bound and an exclusive bound. So whenever I talk about boundaries, I try, or ranges, I try to say inclusive if I mean that both the lower end and the upper end are legal values in that range. So hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, of course, call out mud in the chat, and as soon as I catch it, I'll stop. Okay, so let's back up for a second. I'm getting messages here. Okay, some people say it's blurry, some people say it's readable. I'll tell you what. Let's make it obnoxiously large, and that way, even if it's blurry, hopefully it's still readable. So hopefully that helps you out. So we want to count up from 1 to 10, and when I say, and then as we're counting, print to the console. Okay. All right. To start a for loop, let's talk about the anatomy of a for loop. A for loop begins with the for keyword, which is nice and easy because we can remember that. If it's a for loop, start with for. Nice. And so once you have the for loop keyword, once you have for, you add a parenthetical. Now the parenthetical, much like an if statement where this acts like a condition, a container for the condition, this is going to hold the condition, but it's actually going to hold more than the condition. In a for loop, that parenthetical is going to hold up to 3 important pieces of information. So in that for loop, we have what's called the initial condition. We might refer to this simply as the starting point. Once we've defined the starting point, and I'll show you how to do that, of course, but once we've defined the starting point, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put a semicolon and then start the next part. In the second portion, we have the loop condition. Now, just like an if statement, the loop condition is any Boolean evaluation you want. But the idea is that we know that we want to loop a certain number of times based on some requirement or some criterion, right? Given that, we should write the loop condition so that the loop is guaranteed to terminate once we've iterated that many times. Okay? So in our loop condition, we will address some value that's constantly changing, inevitably reaching a conclusion. Finally, we have the modifier. I don't really have a better term for this, but I guess if I want to be a little bit more clear, I would say the iteration modifier. We're going to use this opportunity to modify the value, some value that is part of this loop condition, so that with every iteration through the loop, we run a modifier that changes that value, and then this loop condition inevitably reaches a conclusion. Now, when I talk about it conceptually, obviously that doesn't make a lot of sense. So let's actually put it into practice, and let's see what that looks like when it's actually in code. Okay. So, for example, let's do the following. Let's do it like really hard coded and really simple. And the first thing we do is we need to declare a starting point. And the way we do that is we declare a variable, usually of an int, because we're going to be counting in whole numbers. And the common convention is just to call this I. I is often short for index or iteration or iterator. You can also call it count, or if you're doing something specific, like you're going through the day of the week, you might even say it's daynum or give it some name that makes sense. But I'm going to follow the common convention and just say I. Oh, you know what? No, let's call it count because we're counting, right? And you want it to start at the value where you wish to begin, which sounds silly. It sounds obvious, but remember what I talked about inclusive and exclusive bounds? We want to make sure that this is the inclusive value of the lower end. So if I want to count from 1 to 10, I probably want to start at 1 in my counter. So my starting point is going to be the number 1. So I've used the for keyword, I've started my parenthetical, and I've got my starting point where I've declared an int count that starts at 1. Next, we're going to have the Boolean condition. If we want to count all the way up to 10, then what we want is for this loop to repeat so long as count is less than or equal to the number 10. When this condition is true, this loop is going to repeat. And I'm going to go into deeper detail as to how a for loop works just a little bit. But just understand that every time through the loop, it's going to check to see if count is less than or equal to 10. So if count is less than or equal to 10, the loop's going to occur again. Finally, we're going to do our modifier. And what we're going to modify is the variable that's keeping track of where we are in terms of how many times the loop has executed. In this case, that variable is count, and we want to increase it by 1. If you've never seen this operator before, all this does is increase the value of count by 1 after the value of count has been assessed. In this particular case, whether I do count plus plus or I do plus plus count, it's the same thing. Similarly, if I do plus equals 1, that is also the same thing. Finally, if I say count equals count plus 1, that's the same thing. All of these operations are exactly the same. If I want to say, hey, take the value of count as it currently stands and add 1 to it, and then when you're done, store it back in count, this is fine. But the shorter version, whoa, undo goes way further back than I wanted it to. So, count plus equals 1, right? This is the exact same thing as count equals count plus 1. And then finally, count plus plus is the same thing again. All right? For the record, yeah, I don't have, unfortunately, I don't have a moderator on hand right now. So it's very difficult for me to like kick out toxic elements, which is kind of a problem, right? Let's see. I am doing that. Well, that's only for, that's not for, hang on a second. Let me just take a moment and fix this, shall I? Great. Now you're going to get like double stream. Yay. Psh. And we're just going to, let's see, what's this one? Mod user and then timeout, and we're just going to ban. Yay. There we go. Hopefully that helps us out. Sorry about that, guys. I didn't catch that right away, obviously. Um, hey, Silent Spectrum, how you doing? All right, so going back to loops. So now I've got my for loop, and I've got my starting point, and I've got my Boolean condition, and then I've got my modifier. Now, I'm going to come inside of the loop, and I'm going to say, okay, sys out, control space, and we're going to say, we'll just, you know what, we'll keep it nice and simple, and we'll just print the value of count on its own line. So it's going to go, you know, vertically 1. Oh, that whole time I was typing on my code, you were just looking at my face. I'm so sorry. So let me try that again. This line of code is what I added. That's the only thing I've changed. The end. So what we're doing there is just everything on its own line, right? We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, all the way down to 10. Okay? So this is what's going to happen. In fact, I wonder if I could drop a breakpoint and just kind of show you how this functions. Let's see. Yeah. If I double click on this number, there's this itsy bitsy teeny tiny dot, and that's called a breakpoint. When I run this in debug, it will pause my code when we get to this point. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and run this in debug. Some of you probably, in fact, all of you, if you're in my class, have never seen this because I haven't debugged in class yet. And we want to, yeah, blah, 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 blah. There we go. First time you run it, it gets weird, and that's okay. I'm going to switch my perspective, though, so you can see what's going on. And I'm going to just minimize this for right now. Although I'll probably need that back. But that's okay. So right now, the code is running. That's what this little red box means. It means, hey, I'm playing. You might want to terminate me at some point, and that's fine. But notice that the code is paused. And it's paused right here. Now, as I step over, that means just go to the next line of code. I can come back over here to, let's see, what is it? That's my breakpoints, and that's my expressions, and here's my variables. So I'm going to go ahead and just pin that back in there. You'll notice that now we have a count variable, and currently that count variable is 1. We also have the args variable for being in main. We don't really care about that right now. Just ignore that. So here's count, right? And so we come inside here, and we're going to go ahead and step over, which is F6. So I'm going to hit F6, and you'll notice down here in the console, the number 1 printed, right? And then what happened was we got to the end of the loop. It immediately ascended back to the 4, and then it went and checked, okay, what's the current value of count? So let's back up for just 1 second. The first time that a for loop runs, the first time that we reach this code, the starting point section runs. But the starting point section of a for loop only runs once. It only runs at the beginning of the loop and not for the rest of the life of the loop. It is a starting condition and only gets initialized at the very beginning. Every iteration after that, if that loop is executing over and over again, that section of the for loop does not repeat. It only happens at the very beginning of the for loop. Make sense? And so at the very start of the for loop, this happens, creating the count variable and then setting the value to 1. Now, when we go through the count, or when we go through the loop again, like we finish this line, we hit this curly brace. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, and I'm so sorry. Once this has initialized, the very next thing it does is it checks the loop condition. If this thing is true, it will enter the body of the loop. And it checks the loop condition the very first time we enter into the loop. It has to, because it is possible, based on dynamic values and maybe inputs from the user before we get to the for loop, it's possible that our starting condition mixed with the Boolean condition actually makes that Boolean evaluate to false. In other words, it's possible for this loop to never execute, and that might be okay. It just depends on the context. So, sorry. I accidentally fat fingered a key. So, loop starts, starting condition declared, only happens once. Then immediately checks this Boolean condition, and if it is true, it goes into the body of the loop. Right now, count is 1, and count is less than or equal to 10, so we're going to go into the body of the loop, and then we're going to print out this number 1. Once we've done that, and we've hit this closing curly brace, the runtime immediately returns to the top of the loop. But first, it executes this statement when it gets there. It says, okay, let's modify count. Once it modifies count, it immediately checks the Boolean condition again. So what's going to happen is we're going to change count to the number 2. And then once count is the number 2, we're going to say, hey, is 2 less than or equal to 10? And the answer is, yes, it is. That's going to be true. So when I hit F6, we go back into the loop. Notice that count is 2. And the way the debugger works, I can't show you that the count happens that count plus plus happens first and then the check occurs. I can't show that to you the way that the Java or that the Eclipse debugger works. But I'm trying to explain what's happened. That count has increased to 2, and then we do the Boolean check. Make sense? So count is 2. 2 is less than or equal to 10. We go back into the loop, and we print the number 2. We go back to the top of the loop. We increase the value of count by 1, and then we're going to check this Boolean condition. And if it's true, repeat the loop. And there we go, repeating this loop over and over again. Notice the value of count is changing, right? Like right now as this is paused, count is 8. 8 is less than 10, so we've gone into the loop. But we haven't executed this line of code yet, so it hasn't appeared here in the console. When I hit F6, it executes that line of code and then goes back up to the top of the loop and then goes through the process we've described. Then we get to 9. Oh, come on now. I hit the wrong key at first. Then we get to 9, right? Cool. Then we get to 10. When count plus plus is 10, what is this Boolean evaluation going to become? This thing is looking for less than or equal to 10. So is 10 less than or equal to 10? Yeah, it is. So when I hit this F6, count goes to 10. 10 is less than or equal to 10, so it goes into the loop. And then we print it. Now, you won't get a chance to see this because as soon as this fails, the Java debugger is going to step out of this. The Eclipse debugger is going to step out. But count is going to increase to 11. So what's going to happen when count increases to 11? It's going to go to 11, and then it's going to go to that count Boolean, that count less than or equal to 10 thing, right? So count's going to become 11, and then it's going to make this check. Is 11 less than or equal to 10? Nah, no, it's not. So it's going to go right out of the loop. It hits this closing brace, goes right to the next line of code. In this case, the next line of code is the end of the program. So if I just say, hey, play until the next breakpoint, it's actually just going to run until the program ends. You can tell the program ended because that red square is now gray. So we have a for loop, we have a starting spot, we have a Boolean condition that says, hey, when this thing is true, actually go into the loop and do the thing. And then we have the modifier. If we've written our loops well, then that modifier gets us to reach the end of the loop inevitably. That means it is guaranteed that the loop is going to stop. And it might even be a situation, depending on the context and how we've written this loop, there might even be a situation where this loop doesn't run at all. It might run 0 times. But the point of this kind of loop is that we know in advance how many times we want to run the loop, right? We know in advance. If I want to count from 1 to 10, I know I want to run 10 times. Or maybe let's change it up just a little bit. Let's say, hey, look, instead of counting from 1 to 10, let's count from 1 to 10 by, let's see, printing only the even numbers. Now, there are a couple ways to do this. I can either leave this alone, I can leave this just the way it is, and then inside, I can write, oh, by the way, I'm going to change my perspective back to the regular coding perspective, not the debug perspective. I could write this and then say, if count mod 2 equals 0, that's how we check to see if a number is even, right? If I do that, and then auto format so everything looks pretty, that's Control-Shift-F. Control-Shift-F is auto format. That makes everything lovely. If I do that, then I will only print the even numbers. So if I just run this, if I just execute this right now, and I say, yeah, go, right? I get 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. This is the outcome that I wanted. But the question becomes, how many times did I actually run this? How many times did I actually execute the for loop? How did I do, how many times? Hopefully you can see that the answer is, oh, hi there. That's Zach Peck. Hi, Mr. Peck. I know it's taken a long time to get this message, but hi. Yeah. And then someone was answering a question about loops, right? Someone's asking the question in the chat, is this important for Fraculator? The answer is, unless you're using arrays to store your data, no. Not the for loop, but the for loop isn't the only kind of loop in Java. So what I'm trying to do is teach you the principle of loops and why loops exist, and I'm teaching you this particular loop because it gives you an idea of how loops function, right? They're going to check a condition and then execute again until that condition is false. Once that condition is false, when they check it, they're going to say, oh, don't run the loop again, and kick out of the loop. All loops function that way. But there are four different kinds of loops, two of which are for loops, and two of which, the other two, are while loops. And so I want to show you how loops work in general, and then we can talk about some other things. But just to be clear, depending on how you write your code for Fraculator, you don't need a for loop ever in Fraculator. So, how many times did I actually run this loop? Well, you know, I'm going to be a little repetitive here. And I say that because I know that there's a way to write this loop a little differently and get the same result. But just for right now, I'm going to say int loop count. That's how many times the loop executes, right? And I'm going to start at 0. And I'm only going to increment this value every time the body of the loop executes. So when I go inside the body of the loop, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to increment loop count. And then when the loop is done, I'm going to go ahead and print out iterations. That's how many, that an iteration is when you execute the inside of a loop. That's one iteration. And when you go back to the top, if you go again, that's another iteration, right? So iterations, and then we will add loop count. There we go. Bam. If I could just spell it right, that'd be great. There we go. So now I'm going to go ahead and count this thing out. And at the very end, I'm going to say how many iterations we have. If I execute this, you'll see that we go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So I have 5 values here, right? But notice that the number of times the loop ran was still 10. It still ran the loop 10 times because the iterator that I'm using, the count variable, it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And inside the loop, I'm checking to see, hey, is count even or odd? Well, when count is odd, I don't print a message. When count is even, I print a message. But just because I have 5 outputs doesn't mean the loop only ran 5 times. It actually ran 10 times, right? And that's pretty easy to follow. No big deal. So how could we make this better? How could we do this in a little better way? Well, what if instead of starting at 1, we started at 2? So we actually begin at the number 2. And we're still going to go as long as count is less than or equal to 10. That's okay. But instead of increasing by 1, what could we do that would be smarter? Well, what if we just increased it by 2 instead? So it's going to be 2 the first time. We're going to come through, and if I do this, I don't even need this check anymore, do I? Just get rid of that, right? So get rid of the if statement, change the incrementer. Instead of incrementing by 1, we're going to increment by 2, which is perfectly legal. And then say, cool, 2, then 4, then 6, then 8, then 10. Okay, great. Now let's execute this. Now I still get the same output, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. But the number of iterations is only 5. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that a for loop can run a precise number of times based on your starting condition, your starting point, and your Boolean check, and the way you modify that value. We could even count by powers of 2 if we wanted to, but that's probably something for a different, we could try that some other time, right? That's a story for another time. But hopefully, this makes a lot of sense, right? Hopefully that this kind of clarifies how a for loop works. Let me show you one more thing about a for loop, because I think you might find this interesting. Let's say for a moment that we want to get user input, and we're going to take that string that they give us, and we are going to print out each character in that string, where each character is on its own line. So instead of printing horizontally, like if I say hello world, instead it's going to be HELLOW, space WORLD, and we're going to do a vertical print. Okay, so that means that I've got to take a single string and I've got to go character by character to print this thing out. let's just, you know what, to save time, let's just simulate user input. And normally I would build a buffered reader and I do read line and all that stuff, right? But for right now, let's just simulate it to save time. And let's just say hello, and I believe in grammar, world, right? Okay, cool. Yay from markup languages. Nice. Visual Basic is better. Oh, you troll, Silver Wolf Claw. Well, Visual Basic is kind of where C# began, if you will. C# is the best, though. All right, personal opinion. Here we go. I'm a random kid from Cali and have no idea what's going on. Hey, random kid from Cali. Nice to have you here. All right, so let's say that our user input. I'm going to clean this up, by the way, because I don't want it to look confusing. So let's take our input, and I'm just going to say, given some user input. Given some user input, print each character on its own line. So, in other words, I want to go through this string character by character, printing each one on its own line, right? And anytime I do that, first of all, the string is already a finite length. And one of the cool features of a string is that if you ask it, it will tell you how big it is. It will tell you how many characters it has. The way that we ask a string how many characters it has is we just say, you know, like here we'll do int and then we'll do num of chars just for fun. And then we just talk to the string user input and then we just say, hey, what's your length? By calling this method, it's going to return the number of characters in this string. And right now we have 5, 7, looks like 13. I think it's 13, right? Oh, yes, and you're welcome for the comma and hello world. I'm there for you. All right, so we have like 13 characters here, and if I really want to know that that's exactly the right number, who knows, maybe I'm off by 1 or something. But let's just go ahead and let's just print out num of chars just so we can see that our numbers are correct, right? So if I run this thing, yep, sure enough, it's got 13 characters. Yay, we're good. All right, awesome. Now, we can ask a string how long it is, and that's great. And now I can write this loop a couple of ways. I can do what we did before. I can say, hey, for int, and this time I'm going to use the convention I. This time it's short for the term index, which you'll see in a moment. And I'm going to start it at 0. And the reason is, in truth, behind the scenes, a string is just a collection of characters. But when I say a collection of characters, I mean that in the coding data structure sense. In our classes, in our classroom, we haven't gone over the notion of arrays or collections yet. But imagine, you know, we normally have a variable, and a variable can hold one value, right? But what if we had a variable that was capable of holding many values daisy chained together? When we have a sequence of values like that, or if we just have a set of values, that is often stored in an object that is loosely referred to as a collection. And collections come in various flavors, just like variables come in various flavors, right? This variable holds an int, while this variable holds a string, and things like that. We can have a collection that holds nothing but ints. And one of the probably the most common collection is the array. Behind the scenes in a string, all of the characters in a string, they're technically being stored inside of an array data structure. Now, when you have a collection of values like that, right? When you have a collection of values, in fact, I'm gonna visualize this with my good old friend, you know, Excel. Yay! And then it'll take a moment just to open up. But when you have a collection of values, what happens is, you know, you say, okay, I want it to be, I don't know, I want to have 5 int values, right? So then these buckets get reserved to hold 5 different ints. Behind the scenes, each bucket, so that we can reference it, each bucket has its own index. And just for readability, I'm going to go ahead and just format that for a second. Each bucket has its own index. And it starts at 0, not at 1. In fact, in computer science, often counting for computers starts at 0. I think we talked about this when we talked about numbering systems. It starts at 0 and then works its way up, right? So the first value, the first index in an array is 0. The next one is 1. The next one is 2. The next one is 3. And the next one is 4. What's interesting is that this array is considered of length 5. So I'm going to say that the length of this array currently is 5. This yellow row, this is where we store the values in each of these buckets. So it's like having 5 int variables, but they're all daisy chained together so that we can store all that information into one variable, one that holds the collection, right? So strings are very much the same way. Like the word hello, for example. It's actually the char h, Excel, right? It's the char h, the char lowercase e, and then an L and an L and an O. What you're seeing here, this is sort of a visual representation of what the string hello looks like in memory behind the scenes. It's in a collection of 5 char buckets where each one is referenced by an index. So if you understand that, then you understand that this string, which is 13 characters, has H at index 0 and E at index 1 and the first L at index 2. And then all the way over here, we have the exclamation mark at index 12. So far, so clear? I sure hope so. Yeah, I got to update my office. I'm sorry about that. All right, so we're going to start index I at 0 because that's going to allow us to start at the first character of this string. So since that's my starting point, I'm going to do a semicolon here. And I want to keep going so long as I is less than our user input dot length. Now think about that for a second. Remember previously when I was counting from 1 to 10, I had count is less than or equal to 10, right? But in this case, I want I is less than length. Why is that? Well, remember that the length of the array, in this example, the length of the array is 5. But where's index 5? Index 5 is technically right here, but there is no index 5. Since it starts at 0 base counting, yeah, you've got 5 buckets, but it starts 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That is 5 spots. That's 5 spots, 5 indices. But since it starts at 0, there is no index 5. If there was an index 5, we'd have 6 characters, right? So I don't want I to get to 13. That's the length, right? The length is 13. I don't want I to get to 13 because if I do that, then when I'm inside the loop, I'm going to cause an exception to be thrown. I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a moment, but just trust me. If I let I get to 13 in this case, it will actually cause the app to explode. Metaphorically. Or literally if you're running an AMD processor. So, mud on a lot. But the chat is so far behind that it's hard to start somewhere. Yeah, I hear you. I'm going to bring it up with tutors tomorrow. That's fair. That's fair. Zoom into Excel. Oh, you got a good point there. Sorry about that. Sorry. Yeah, we'll fix that later when it matters. Okay, here we go. All right, so now remember the final part of a for loop is that we modify our counter so that we inevitably reach a condition where this is false, right? So we're going to start at 0 and we're going to count up by 1 every time. Now when I do this, the next part is really easy. If I've come inside the loop, that means that I is a valid value for going through the string. And we're just going to go ahead and you know what? I'm going to break this up into 2 steps so you can see my thought. But let's do char and let's just call it symbol. And I'm going to set this equal to our string. And I'm going to use a special method called char at. And char at allows me to pass in an index. So if I pass in char at 0, it's going to give me the character that's at index 0. And if I pass in char at 10, for example, it's going to give me the character at index 10, and so on. Well, I want to go through each character in this string. So I'm going to start at 0 and just work my way up. So inside the body here, I want to do char at whatever the current value of I is. I is going to start at 0. I'm going to come in here, do the first letter. Then at the end of the for loop, I'm going to increase I by 1, check to see if it's still true. And if this thing is still true, come back inside, use the new value of I to get the next character. Come outside the loop, go up, increment by 1, check the bool, and so on, right? So then when this is done, this is what we get. Notice that I'm still printing out the number of characters up here, and that's okay. So, yep, save. Come on. Run. Oh, I done goofed. Sorry. I forgot the part where I actually print this thing out. That might actually be useful, right? So, and yeah, right now I'm getting the length, but I'm not actually printing the length. I just saw that too. So, yeah, that's okay. Hey, we all make mistakes. All right, so here I want to print out the symbol. Great. All right, let's go ahead and run this thing. There we go. Notice it's, I'm going to go ahead and just expand this. So here is hello world, where every character is printed one line at a time. So in other words, we used a for to go through every character in this string, using the char at method and keeping track of a counter that acted like our index. Now, I'm going to show you something just a little more advanced. To autosave on load. Yeah, it's okay to check that box. I would absolutely check that box. All right. Anyway, here we go. So instead of doing a regular, I'm sorry, I was reading the chat to make sure I hadn't missed anything important. Who knows, I probably have. So let's go ahead and comment this out for a second. Now it's not doing anything, right? In Java, there's something called the enhanced for loop. This is something that we colloquially refer to as the for each loop. If I could just get the hyphen, for each loop. All the for each loop does is it goes through a collection or anything that we can iterate through one by one. And then we get access to that value and we can use that value for something. A for loop, an enhanced for loop is not good for changing that value in the collection, but it's good for going item by item through the collection in order to access the information and then take some action based on that information, right? So for example, in our case, we just want to print the symbol. Not a problem. Let's do for. It starts off exactly the same and it still has a parenthetical, right? Except we're going to specify what data type is in our collection. And we're going to say char. And we'll just say like a symbol like we did before. So for every character that we'll refer to as symbol, and then we do a colon, which means in this case in. And then we have to get the user input. I want to say we have to do a char sequence. Let's to char array. There we go. This is going to give us the actual char array. In other words, it's going to take the string and it's going to look at all the characters inside the string, and it's going to give us an array of those characters outside of the string object, which is very important. The string itself does not like, it doesn't behave well in this situation. It doesn't want to allow you to iterate through there unless you're going to have specific indices. You know, we can get the single character one at a time, but it doesn't want to just automatically go through. So we're going to get the char array, the collection of characters from the string. And when we do that, it allows us to say, hey, for every character, which I'll refer to as symbol, in this char array, do the following. And here we can just say, hey, sysout symbol. By doing this, I don't have to save the symbol off first and then print it, or I don't have to access it by its specific index. What this for loop does is it automatically starts at the first character, goes in here, does the thing, goes to the second character, does the thing, and it keeps moving character by character, going through the loop until it gets to the end. Once it gets through this character, does the thing, it's now at the end of the string. And this for loop will automatically terminate on its own. So to see it in action, let's go ahead and hit play. And there we get the exact same outcome that we did before, but this time we wrote a little less code. So we have a standard for loop, and we have the enhanced for loop, also known as the for each loop. All right, cool. All right. Let's go ahead and take just a moment and let's kind of collect our thoughts. We did a whole bunch of talking about loops, about for loops particularly. Will you use for loops in Fraculator? Unless you used an array to store your data? No, you won't use for loops in a Fraculator. However, you might be interested in looking up the other two kinds of loops, right? We have the while loop and we have the do while loop, which just like these for loops, There are a lot of similarities between these for loops, but they are still fundamentally different, not only in how they're written, but how they handle execution. While loop and do while are nearly the exact same thing. Guys, they're nearly the same thing. But there is a fundamental and distinct difference between a while and a do while. Okay? Now, before I dive into that, I want to make sure that I haven't missed anything important in the chat as far as like topics you'd like to see and things of that nature. So I'm just going to take a moment here and just kind of look through the chat and see if there's anything else you guys would like to talk about. There's definitely a ton of memes, so that's nice. Way to go ahead and tell me about all this mud. Okay, cool. So behind every string is a char array. Yep, that's right. The question is, in Fraculator, what would be more efficient, do while or while? Well, I guess that kind of depends on where you are in the Fraculator. If you're talking about a menu, you know what? A menu is a really good place to demo a loop. So, just really quick, let me go ahead and clear up this visual stuff, right? We don't need to see this right now. So I'm going to get rid of that. Don't worry, I will archive this video later. You can always see it on YouTube later, and then you can review it and try to catch up. Let's say we have a menu, right? I'm going to go ahead and make a string, and we're going to call this options. This is going to be our menu options, okay? And I'm going to say, please choose one of the following. And, you know, I'm going to go ahead and use this escape character. Remember that? This escape character is going to create a new line. And in fact, I think, no, I'll keep it there. I'll keep it there. And purely for readability, I'm going to go ahead and concatenate and create the next line or create the next string, okay? And I'm going to say, let's tab in and let's start with number 1. And number 1, let's see. Please choose one of the following. The division. See, this is already devolving, isn't it? Let's do a new line, and I will concatenate onto it tab 2. That's just it's going to give me a tab character and then give me the number 2. And then currently, let's see, I just played Detroit Become Human. That was an amazing experience. Just incredible. Let's do tab 3, Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. We'll do a new line. Again, just for readability, I'm concatenating here. And then we'll do a tab, and we'll do the number 4. And I did just play all the way through God of War. I haven't platinumed it yet. But, gosh, what would be another good one? When we learn about menus in class. Hey, how you doing? How you doing, Shut Door? Here we go. Menus. Yay! Okay, and then we'll talk about exiting and all that stuff. Okay, cool. And then we have... let's do... Yeah, fine. Let's do Monster Hunter World, because that game's great. And then, because I like the option to let them exit and to leave, I'm going to create a little extra space, and I'm going to give them the 0 option. I often refer I often reserve 0 to be the exit. So let's see. Oh my gosh, what just happened? Sorry, my system, my observer just freaked out. But anyway, all right. So I often reserve the 0 option to be exit. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and just put a semicolon here. And I am going to drop down. And I'm going to just go ahead and give this a print. And I'm going to print out my options. Now, you know what? One more thing I'm going to do here. And I'm really hoping this is working. I'm using a second device to kind of observe the channel to make sure everything's running okay. And right now, the observer just like straight died. All right, there we go. Yeah, we're okay. All right, so another thing that I like to do is I like to bump down one line and then say, please enter the number of your choice. So here we are. I've created the options as a string. This is kind of, you know, lengthier than I might normally do, but this makes it readable and understandable when I'm trying to maintain this. And there's nothing wrong with this, so I can do this. And ultimately, it will allow me to enter in some option right here as the user. So here I am printing out these options and then selecting one, right? And if I wanted to, for right now, I'm going to go ahead and go through the process of adding in a buffered reader so that I can read input. Public static void buffered reader. And we'll just call this Buffy because that's always humorous. And we'll make it a new buffered reader, which takes in a new input stream reader, which wraps around the system.in input stream. Okay, you've all seen that before. I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to do Control-Shift-O to get my 2 imports in. For normally that would work. Oh, habit, sorry. It's public static, not public static void. Now I can do Control-Shift-O and I get my 2 imports, okay? And I know for a fact that I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say throws IO exception. At some point I'm going to need that, and yeah, that's going to require another import. There we go. So I've got my buffered reader and I'm passing the buck of responsibility. Yay! And now I can read input, right? So here I'm going to say string user input equals, and I'm going to call Buffy dot read line. Hey, you know what? Since we're here, allow me to show you a common practice in industry. In industry, it's commonly the practice that in the class, you declare all the class level stuff first, especially variables. You declare all the variables first, constants and all that stuff. Similarly, inside of a method, first you declare all the variables you're going to need, and then you start acting on those variables down in the code. So even though I'm declaring and initializing this variable down here, normally what I would do is I would say string user input here, and I might even initialize it to some default value. And then down here, instead of declaring, I would just reassign. The reason we do this is it keeps all of our variables at the top and then all of our executable code thereafter. So if I were to comment this is just a little bit, I would say, you know, these are local variables. That means variables that belong to the method. So variables that belong to the method. And then after I declared all those, I would have the actual code, the statements that do stuff, right? All right, cool. And somehow I am disconnected from the chat. Yay! I cannot see your chat. Hang on a second, let me fix that. I'm just gonna bump this over here. There we go. Now I can see the chat. Zoe fell asleep on your couch watching this stream. Ah, that's great. All right, so let's see. I still want to know how to end the program without using... Yeah, okay. So I'm going to show you that coming up. So here is our menu, right? And let's pretend for a moment that whatever they choose, I'm going to take some action, right? And normally I'd write this more intelligently, but for the purposes of our demo, I'm just going to go ahead and sys out you chose, and then the number they chose, which in this case, I'm just going to use the user input. I'm not going to worry about changing it to an int or any of that stuff, right? Now, in the case where it's not 0, if the user chose anything other than 0, do the menu again. In other words, let them choose again, right? So how do we do that? Well, these two things, the declaration of user input and the declaration of options, this stuff doesn't need to happen again. This only has to happen once, and we'll use it over and over. However, printing the options, reading the input, and then responding to that input, all of those things, those are the things I want to have happen again, right? So I'm going to use a do while loop. I'm going to say, hey, do this stuff. And then while the user chose anything other than 0, do again, right? So this is what it's going to look like. First, we start with the keyword do. just like with a for loop, we start with the keyword for. And then at the end of the stuff we want to have repeat, remember these 3 lines of code, this is the stuff we want to have repeat. We're going to do a closing curly brace. And then we'll use the keyword while. We're going to give it a parenthetical, just like an if has a parenthetical. This parenthetical is going to be where we put our loop condition, that Boolean expression that determines if we need to loop again. And get ready for it. This is the only loop that ends in a semicolon. Mind blown. Right? Okay, yeah. So it's the only loop that does that. Now, good deal. So now that we have this code, right? What we're saying here, I'm going to do Control-Shift-F to format this thing. Oh, except I'm not in good syntax yet because I don't have my condition yet, right? All right, so these 3 lines of code are the parts that are going to repeat. So how do I know? How do I know if they want to exit? Well, in this case, right? In this case, we could either compare strings, which is totally doable, and it would look like this. I could say user input dot equals, and really, I'm just looking for this input, right? But this right now says, hey, as long as they've entered 0, do it again. But I want to do it again if they haven't entered 0. In other words, I want to do it again when it's not equal to 0. Remember, when we're doing comparisons, the bang takes whatever Boolean result we have and flips it. So if they did enter 0, the bang will turn this evaluation to false and the loop will stop. If they did not enter 0, then equals will return false, but this bang will turn that false to true. And as long as this thing evaluates to true, the loop's going to happen again. So let's see it in action. I know that when you explain it verbally, it doesn't always make as much sense. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and hit play. And I'm going to give this a little bit more real estate so you can see what's going on. And it's like, hey, please choose one of the following. Then we have our 4 choices, and then we also have the exit. And here I'm going to say like, cool, let's do number 1. And it's like, you chose number 1. And because I didn't choose 0, the menu occurs again. And it's like, cool, I really liked Detroit Become Human, so let's do that one. And I can go through all these. But at the end, I can say 0 and hit enter. Notice that when I hit 0, it says you chose 0, so this line still ran. But then it gets to this check. And it says, you entered 0. That means that this method returns true, and the bang turns that true to false. And since this whole thing evaluated to false, the loop is going to stop. In fact, usually what I do is out here, I'll do a sys out and I'll be like, bye-bye. And then I get like a really mean girly, right? Bye-bye. And then that's it. That way I know that this thing is over, right? Of course, I'm not going to be a mean girl. I'm going to say like, have a nice day or some garbage, right? So here we go. We hit play. And we're going to go ahead and hit 0 just to see it in action. And sure enough, you chose 0 and then have a nice day. So in other words, I still took action and then the loop ended and I came out of this, right? So this do while loop, what I love about do while loops is notice where the condition actually gets checked. You know, previously in our for loop, the condition gets checked right away, right? Right away. And in this case, in a do while, what happens is the do says, hey, go do this stuff first. And then once you've done this once, then check the condition. And that's kind of good because notice that our condition here is completely dependent on the user input we get inside the loop. So it's good that we do this first before we check the condition. Then we check the condition, and if this condition evaluates to true, the loop repeats. If the condition evaluates to false, the loop stops. But notice that it stops after the body has run at least once. This is extremely important. You know, technically, I could do the exact same thing that we have here. In fact, I'm just going to copy pasta this really quick. I could do the exact same thing. I'm going to go ahead and comment this out, and I'm going to do blam. And instead of a do, I'm just going to start with while. And in other words, I'm just going to get rid of the do, come down here, grab this condition, cut it, get rid of that semicolon, by the way, and then pause to the while. This is exactly the same concept, except for one important difference. What's the difference here? What's the difference here? The difference here is that, by the way, see you later, Silver Wolf. Gute Nacht. Guten Abend. The difference here is, when does the thing actually get checked? When does this condition actually get checked? It gets checked first. And based on what we have here, I realized that this particular check is looking for user input, and the user hasn't input anything yet. And remember that our user input starts as null. In fact, what's really funny is if I run this right now, I'm actually going to break the program because this starts as null. But you know what? What if instead the default... Well, actually here, I'll show you the crash first. Okay? Here's the crash. If I set this string to null, and then I try to call a method on the string, this method requires that the string is not null. But since it was null, it's going to throw what's called a null pointer exception. So running it with the default of null, that's going to break it in this particular case. Let's go ahead and change it to 0. If I run it as 0, what's going to happen? Remember, this condition gets checked before it executes any of this inner code. So if user input starts at 0, notice how it goes immediately to have a nice day. There is no prompt. There is no input. Nothing happens because when we got here, user input was already the string 0. And so because of that and this check, it said, oh, this evaluates to false. I'm just going to skip over the loop and do this, right? That's really what's going to happen. So this is me showing you the difference between a do while and a while. A while will check its condition very first thing. And it's possible, based on how this condition is written, it's possible this loop never runs its body, right? But with a do says this loop always runs its body at least once. At least one time, right? It's a guarantee. That's a fundamental difference between these two loops. Now, good news, everyone. The loops that I just showed you, the while and the do while, these loops are absolutely not only useful, I would dare say required. You got to use at least one of these in your fraculator. Every time you have a menu of any kind, or any time that you're taking in user input and you're going to act on the input, maybe you're going to validate that input, right? Every time you do something like that, a do while is where you want to be because it guarantees that this executes at least once. It guarantees it. In other cases, there are other places where a standard while loop makes sense. And these are cases where you're not sure how many times it's going to run and you're not sure if it's going to run at all, right? You might be in a situation where this runs 0 times, and that's okay. All right, so this is us talking about loops. I only intended to go over 4 loops for the most part, and we went over all 4 kinds of loops. Again, this video will be archived off, so if anything got a little confusing or if you fell behind or if you had some stream problems, this is going to get archived off to YouTube, and hopefully it'll be much better in the YouTube format than it was here on Twitch. So, and this is the first time that we're doing this, so obviously there are going to be hiccups, obviously there are going to be some technical difficulties, and so I really appreciate you kind of taking the time to experiment with this with me. Right now it's 10:40. We still do have a little bit of time if you want to talk about anything else. But these loops right here, this is going to make a huge difference in your fraculator. This is going to make menus so much easier. Before I forget, just one tiny thing I want you to know. Loops are great. But sometimes when you're inside of a loop, you want to loop again. And what I mean is, given this input, I want to validate that this input is valid before I do anything else, right? So I might go through here and do a validation check. And if I did that, then I might do another do, right? And then after we get this information First, I'm going to check to see if the input is invalid. Then I want to print an error message. Or more appropriately, I want to inform the user that their input was invalid. And then I want to do it again. So I'm going to say while input is invalid, come back up here to the do and do it again, right? I might say that their input was invalid. Please try again, right? And then this part would just loop over and over. In other words, I have a loop inside of my loop. That's perfectly acceptable. That's perfectly acceptable. And what's cool about that is that when the inner loop stops running, it returns to where it left off in the outer loop. So you can have loops inside of loops so that this one can execute and eventually come to a conclusion while this one is still executing, and it may not come to a conclusion. It may keep going. And if you write this well, if you understand how comparisons work, if you understand how and or operators work, you can write this in such a way that if you want to have a global exit, then that global exit will take you out of the inner loop, and you can get through the outer loop quickly and exit entirely out of your loops to end the application. By doing this, this is how we avoid using system.exit 0, which is a completely dirty way to close your application. We should let the main close the application gracefully for us. So what we want is the ability to take our loops, even if they're nested, and exit one by one out of those loops so that we get back to main. Main can finish running its code, and the app just closes itself. That's what we want to do. Now, I am purposely not demonstrating everything that I just spoke about. I'm purposely not doing that because I'm trying not to do your homework for you, right? I just showed you how to create a menu. I just showed you how to take input. I just showed you how to loop through that menu as many times as you want, and then to stop going through that menu the moment you get an answer that says, hey, I want you out of here, right? I'm purposely not coding everything because you need to figure this out for yourself. But I've given you a ton of information that's going to help you do this successfully. So once again, this will be archived to YouTube. Go check it out. It's my channel there is just Professor Krebs, but this time 2 words. In fact, here, I just want to make sure that you can see what it looks like really fast. Let's come over here. Don't worry, I'm going to show it on the screen. I haven't done it yet. I needed to kind of clear that off first. Here we go. And I'm going to go ahead and just change who I'm signed in as. Oh, come on. Where'd it go? I want to go bollocks. Hey, there it is. Sorry. For a moment there, I couldn't find the sign out. I am tired. It's been a long day, dude. Huh. It's been a long day. There we go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and sign in again, only this time I want to sign in as Professor Krebs. Don't worry, it's supposed to be auto... Gosh, freaking dang it. Fine. Boop. And here we go. So here's my channel. And this is where the videos will be archived, and it's just Professor Krebs. Nothing special there. But look for the dude that is giving a speech and pseudo dabs, right? That's not really meant to be a dab, and every student says I'm dabbing. The end. Okay. All right. So, 10:45, and unfortunately, my view of the chat stream is dead. No, there we go. It's back. Yay. All right, cool. I'm checking the stream right now to make sure I haven't missed anything super duper important here. All right. Yeah, my stream. You know what? Every time I play on PS4 and I do the stream for my PS4, it changes the nature of like what my channel is currently streaming. It just bugs the crap out of me, but it's a minor thing. Anyway, all right. So we've covered loops in all their flavors. We covered making menus and exiting menus, right? We've covered all that stuff. I think this is probably a good place to end the stream for tonight because I feel like it was a lot of information. It was a lot of information. And by the way, I'm looking through the chat right now. Here, let me give you, let's see, what am I on? I don't even know what I'm looking at right yet. Oh, yeah, there we are. I'm looking through the chat right now, and I can see that someone said, don't break out of loops, it's bad juju. And I have to agree in the sense that it's bad form. You can break out of loops if you need to. It's there for you to do that if that must happen. But when I write my loops, I write them in such a way that I'm usually not checking for invalidity or the exit option until the very end of the loop, right? And that way, regardless, whether it's invalid input or if they've given me the 0 option, the very next thing that happens is my while condition gets checked. And my while condition is written so that if it's invalid input, I got to do it again. And if it's not 0, I'm going to do it again, right? You can write your loops. You can write them in such a way that they're well written and you don't need break statements. Breaking out of your loop is totally legal, but many developers consider it kind of a dirty workaround. So if you can avoid it, avoid it. If you're not sure how to avoid it because you're brand new to this, I totally understand. If you want to use breaks, you're more than welcome to. I just want you to know that there's a better way. Okay? All right. So let's see. Anything else in the stream? And then someone made like a super loop of the I'm a Physicist YouTube video. Thanks. Actually, thanks. All right. So I think we're probably at the end here. Thank you very much, Pace, for taking the others under your wing. I know that this is tonight was just like an alpha, right? We want to test this out, and I can see how with the difference between what I'm saying and the lag in the chat, and sometimes even video problems, I can see how this particular approach, as it currently is probably not the best way to go. I still like the idea of doing the Twitch stream, so it's a live Q&A. But I think what I'd like to do is work with a few of you guys to put together maybe a Discord server where we can do voice chat. Because I think doing voice chat almost like, I hate to put it this way, but almost like a radio show or like a talk show where we can have one of you come on and be a voice and ask a question, then we can talk about it and do a demo. I think that's going to be way more constructive. So you know what? I'll work on that this week. And then for the Saturday morning stream, which is at 10 a.m., I will do what I can to get that Discord set up so that we can do voice chat instead of text chat because it's way too delayed, right? Awesome. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you being here and trying this out with me. I appreciate you taking the time.